hear me? Awesome possum. Alright, I'm going to give it just a minute for other folks to come online. It seems to be a little bit light in terms of attendance right now. Got a couple announcements before I get started, but I will see where some other folks are before I do get started. Got a lot of stuff going on. Give y'all just about another minute for some stragglers and stuffs. Alright, got a whole bunch of announcements before I get started. I don't think we sent out the email yet, but to those in Raleigh, I believe we are going to have our makeup webinar this Saturday. So look forward to an email talking about that. Thanks so much for, helping me out that other weekend for lab. And hopefully this Saturday we will be remaking that lab. In addition, the week after that, which I believe is definitely November 7th, the Raleigh folks will be going down to Charlotte for the lab where we get to mess around with the laser cutter and stuff. So just keep that in mind on your schedule, and I guess we will go ahead and get started. Question is, I take it we're doing Scratch. Yes, there is a reason, though, that we are doing Scratch after starting Code Combat, though. We are going to be working with the Raspberry Pis a lot more in the next couple of days. Now, I do know that a lot of you probably don't have your Raspberry Pis set up yet. And that's fine. I did not expect for you to. I didn't tell you to do it or anything. But we are going to be using Scratch on the internet. We're not doing it on the Raspberry Pi today. We're just doing Scratch via the internet, even though Scratch does come natively on the Raspberry Pi. Now there are, oh goodness, cat, stop walking on keyboard. Sorry. There are a couple reasons that we're doing this. We have been in the past doing sort of a line-based coding where we sit there and actually type out code. Scratch is a little bit different in that the code's already written for you, you just have to arrange it. So Brendan's saying, sorry you weren't at the last lab. That's okay. We just did some soldering in Raleigh, so no worries that I'm not upset about it. Anyways, but Scratch is a little bit easier just because you already know a lot of the material. You already sort of know loops and if statements and yada yada yada. But there is a reason that we're doing Scratch. Oh, right, about the quadcopter. I forgot about that. Yeah, do that either this weekend or when we're in Charlotte, which is the weekend after that. What we're going to be working on is, okay, I've already said Scratch, but in our labs we're actually going to be working on this right here. The new Raspberry Pi, when we get it all updated and everything, Scratch on it actually comes with a built-in retro gaming emulator. And specifically Pac-Man and, yes, it's an old video game toggle, just like the ones you'd find on an arcade machine. Will it work with RetroPie? I'm not entirely sure, to be totally honest with you. I think that is what it's going through, though. Because there is already a Pac-Man emulator, which is almost spot on, and a Space Invaders emulator on it, which is also spot on. Will we get one? Yes. We're actually going to be building this in one of our next labs, no matter when your lab is, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Next lab, we will be working on this. To those in Raleigh, I do know that in 2 weeks, or I guess a little bit over, or under 2 weeks, we'll also be using the laser cutter down in Charlotte so we can make a case for it. So something that looks like this. Maybe. We'll probably be using it with cardboard or some sort of vinyl. I'm not entirely sure on specifics yet, but I'm really excited for y'all because it's some pretty cool stuff. What's really cool about the emulator that we're using is you can customize it to make... Will yours have the buttons? That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I would assume that either they would come with the buttons, or you would be able to program a button using a breadboard in the Raspberry Pi. So the way that this thing works is via the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. GPIO meaning general purpose input and output. We'll specifically be working with Scratch and the GPIO pins, so maybe we can code to make an LED light up or a servo turn, but also we can do that with Minecraft Pi, and again, that's something that we'll be working on in the future, but we're actually able to customize the games that we create. So, you know, most games are cliche and have a man saving a woman, but ladies, you can make it the other way around, so a woman will be saving the man, just by changing the sprites. So it's some pretty cool stuff there. I really think that you will enjoy it. The reason that we are doing Scratch today, even though it's probably a review for a whole lot of you, is because we will be working with these GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi in the future, not only for Scratch, but for Minecraft Pi. Alright? So any questions on why some of you are doing Scratch for the billionth time? And if you do have a question on it, if you do feel comfortable with Scratch, it's really something that you can't have too much of. Practice does make perfect. I know that's another cliche thing to say, but the more you practice with it, the more cool stuff that you can do. So I do see a question here. You love Scratch and Pi stuff. Yeah, and we haven't done that in over a year now, so the GPIO stuff is really cool with Scratch. That said, we are working with the Raspberry Pi probably next week, so you do need to start figuring out a way to connect your Raspberry Pi to a monitor, but also be able to watch the webinar. Alright? So that means finding a TV, finding an extra keyboard and mouse. Could you cut or laser cut or 3D print a holder for the Pi and toggle like in the picture? I mean, we will be working with the laser cutter to do this in Charlotte, since you're based out of Raleigh. So yes, laser cutting a holder for the Pi and joystick, yes. That is coming up in the future. So if you want to start designing something to laser cut, maybe in, whatchamacallit, not Mesh Mixer, is it? 123D Make? That wouldn't be a bad idea. I'm not sure about the dimensions of this guy, but it's pretty cool. This does involve a little bit of soldering as well, so a lot of stuff that we've gone over all this semester we will be working with. That and the arcade buttons are only $3 if you do want to get one, if we don't give you one. So anyways, any questions on that stuff? What website am I on? Right now I am on adafruit.com. ADA Fruit. This is where we get a lot of our lab materials from, because they have really convenient little kits for, you know, soldering and stuff that's pretty cool in general. But you don't need to go to this website or anything unless you really want to. But we will be working with the online version of Scratch today. This is Scratch version 2.0, I believe, whereas the one on your Raspberry Pis by default is going to be 1.4. Now, over the next week, maybe at your next lab, we will be updating your Raspberry Pis so that it can support the joystick, and I believe the update will let us use the website version of Scratch. So anyways, I know a lot of you already have Scratch accounts made on their website, which is scratch.mit.edu. So if you already have an account on the Scratch website, go ahead and log in. If you don't, click on the link or navigate to that link. At the top right of your screen, there should be a sign up or join us button where you can log in, so just make sure that you put in, a username and a password that you'll remember. I would like for you to, if you have logged in or made an account, to raise your hand on the Scratch website, and I do think a couple people already have, but and if you have, sit tight, there's all sorts of different featured projects that you can take a look at. But as soon as, we want to continue, I'll ask that you please navigate away from these featured projects. So raise your hand, keep it raised if you've logged in or signed up. I just want to see where we're at. That's the only reason I'm asking this. So while you're doing that, this isn't something that you need to follow along with. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what Scratch is. Again, probably a review for some. Just sit tight, like I tend to say. So Scratch is a type of programming language, just like Python, which we've used before. It's a little bit different, though, in that it's already written for you. You just have to organize it appropriately. I have a quick question before I go on. There are 80-year-old kids. See, that's the funny thing. You never actually grow up. I still feel like a kid, and I'm old. You always feel like a kid. It's weird. But yes, there are 80-year-old kids. There are also 8-year-old kids. I would assume you know that. But anyone can use it, essentially, if you can use a computer. It was developed by MIT, and it's actually used in first-year programming students at Harvard. So even though it looks silly and simple, it's actually a very, very powerful tool. Okay? So like I said, it's fun and powerful. You can create content like stories and games. Like I mentioned earlier, the version on the Raspberry Pi right now is going to be different than the one on the website, but we will be updating it, or updating the Pi to maybe not necessarily look like the website, but to work for us. Okay? So I'm going to give it just a moment. Again, please raise your hand, keep it raised if you've logged in or made an account. I do want you to keep up, or I do want to make sure that I'm not leaving anybody behind. Give it about one more minute or so before I go ahead and get started. If you feel so inclined, if you click on your name in the upper right hand corner, you can add stuff to your profile. You don't necessarily have to, though. As you can see, mine is very boring and dull. I had a student last class that had an account from several years ago who had 117 new messages. Does it say that your hand is raised? It does now, yes. It did not before, though. Alright. So I'm going to put your hands down just for now, and I guess we will go ahead and start up on Scratch. So what we're going to do is click on Create. It's in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm going to give you a quick bit of navigation on the online version of Scratch because it's a little bit different. And so I will be switching between PowerPoints several times, so hopefully that doesn't confuse you at all. So anyways, Scratch. Alright, so you'll see a screen that looks sort of like this once you go to the Create option. Now, what you'll see on your screen first is just this little cat guy. That's the Scratch cat. He is the mascot and logo of Scratch. Speaking of cat scratching, I opened the blinds for you so you can stop being annoying. This is what we call our stage. This is where we can actually see action going on once we code it. Alright, so we can actually, right now with our cat, click it and move it around. You'll see that when you move it around, you do have X and Y coordinates that will follow your mouse. It will be helpful for later when we start getting into more complex stuff, which probably will not be today. But once you do create something that you would like to try, you can actually see it built in real time here, and working in real time here, just like you would, any game. Alright. What we have in the middle is called the block palette. Now, by default, we have the Scripts tab enabled. If you click on any of these categories underneath, you'll see a whole bunch of different things pop up here. These are pieces of code that you will be assembling eventually. So just keep that in mind. Also notice that there are things called costume and sounds. Costumes correspond with sprites. We'll get to that in just a second. You can create new costumes, yada yada yada. So if you've done something similar to this, okay, Scratch isn't completely unique. There are other game making languages that are like Scratch, so if you have used one of those before, Scratch will probably come pretty easy to you. But the way I want you to think about the Costumes tab, has anyone played an old video game like Mario, Donkey Kong, anything like that? Like really old school? Pong is a good one because we'll actually be making a Pong game today. I doubt you've played every single old video game, but yeah. So when you're playing Mario has two different looks to it. Okay, most all of them, gotcha. When Mario is walking, he looks one way, but when he's jumping, he has his fist in the air. That's basically what costumes are. Alright? So just different looks for the same, what we call sprite. Now sprites are items that we can code to do something. Alright, so if we look down here in the lower left-hand corner, this is going to be our sprites menu. Notice you can add new sprites, you can draw your own sprites, you can even take a picture of yourself and make that a sprite if you have a webcam. In addition to sprites, we have the ability to change our stage or backdrop. So if you notice right now, our cat sprite is highlighted, so that's why we can see the costumes, or the different costumes for the sprite here. But if we were to click on stage, notice the costumes tab turns to the backdrops tab. Okay? So similarly, for both sprites and stages, you can change the sounds for it. I don't know if I have... There we go. We can change sounds that our character makes or that the stage in general makes. But cool stuff there. Now, what haven't I told you? Yours turned purple? It turned purple when you did what? Your cat? Because you can edit your sprites to look different. There's some really silly sprites I've seen in the past before. But finally, this big, huge area right here is what we call our script area. This is where we actually write our code. Now your code is actually going to change depending on which sprite you have selected. So say that we are making a Pong game. We need a ball and a paddle. We wouldn't want to be able to control our ball, so we'd want to make sure our sprite is the sprite for the paddle is selected. Anyways, that's a lot of stuff. We'll go over that in just a few minutes here. Ooh, excuse me. Okay, block palette. I think I've already gone over that. So at this point, I'm going to change PowerPoints over to the Raspberry Pi version. They're the same thing, they just look different. So just bear with me for now. Same thing, it just, like I said, looks different. Anyway, so we're going to start with our first program here. I want you to navigate in the block palette to Events. And I then want you to click and drag when green flag is clicked over into the script area. So this is generally a good piece of code when you want to start playing your game. So this green flag corresponds to this green flag up here in the stage area. It actually will make your code start running. So right now I don't have any code. When I click it, nothing's going to happen. So exactly the same thing is going to happen if I click this green flag here. For the purposes of letting you see things easier, I do want you to go into the Motion tab, or to the Motion block palette, and click on it. And then drag the Move 10 Steps right underneath the when the green flag is clicked. It should sort of snap in to indicate that, yes, these two pieces of code are connected. So this right here is a program. This is something that will actually work. It's not a very cool program, but it will work. Let's see what happens when I click it on the green flag. It's hard to see. I'll do it again. My character is moving 10 steps in the X direction. Alright, so the X direction is going to be the default, but if you want to go in a different direction, in the Motion tab there's all sorts of different things, like the point in direction, meaning it will start you going left or up or down. But default is going to be going right. Okay? So at this point, I do want you to navigate to the Control tab. And just take a look at the different options that the Control tab contains. Even though the name of these things is different, the concepts that we explored in the Code Combat lessons are the same. Alright? So we talked about loops, where if we have some code contained within a loop, it will run either forever, or we didn't talk about this too much, or however long that we indicate it to go for. The loop that we use in Python corresponds to this forever loop inside of the control panel in Scratch. So go ahead, click and drag forever, and put it underneath the when the flag is clicked. And now we're going to put the move 10 steps inside of this forever block. Did you see your game on Edmodo? No, I have not seen your game yet. Is it something that you'd want to show the whole class, Josh, or do you want me to just take a look at it after class? And that's the one that you were talking about for Android, right? Or the one you made in Python first? Okay, sweet. Yeah, I would love to take a look at it then. Right now it's in C#. Alright. Do I need to download a compiler for it, or will it just run? Okay. Sweet. It's good to know. So to those of you who have very much experience in Scratch, what is this code going to do right here? It's a very, very simple piece of code. Move lots of steps. Yeah, it's just going to keep moving towards the left forever, or until it stops here, but that's just a limitation of the program. And it's going to do it very quickly because it's going to be going through this loop, bam, 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 real quick. So that's all fine and dandy, and I'm glad we got it to work. But we don't necessarily want it to go forever. The forever loop is an infinite loop, but the repeat loop here, repeat is a loop, it just loops it however many times that you indicate. So this one would go through 10 iterations, meaning that it would repeat this command 10 times before it goes to the next piece of code. So notice that it didn't go forever this time. Sorry. It just went 10 steps 10 times in the X direction. Okay? So, talked about that. Yada, yada, yada. Alright, here's a fun little, little thing right here. If we go into the Motion tab, there is a very, very handy if statement called if on edge bounce. Alright, so I'm going to go back real quick and put the forever loop on. I taught that in the wrong order. And put all this stuff within the forever loop. So what I've got now is my character is going to be moving forever 10 steps, but if it hits an edge, it's going to bounce off. We'll be using the if on edge bounce quite a lot. It's a really nice little piece of code here. It makes life very easy. But at this point you might notice, oh no, my cat's going upside down and getting all weird here. What if I want my cat to just change directions? What I could do is click on the little eye next to the sprite here and take a look at some of these options. First, I can rename the cat if I want. It'll tell you its X and Y coordinates, as well as its current direction, meaning it's going 90 degrees, negative 90, 90, negative 90. But underneath there's something called rotation style. So right now, I have it set to rotate, meaning when it hits a wall, it's going to turn upside down. If I click this button next to it, these two arrows pointing away from each other, it will just flip the cat. So it's going to be kind of handy for later on. Okay. So let's see where we're at now. Talked about that. We can rotate our sprites that way too. Something that you'll see later on. This is all stuff for the Raspberry Pi version of Scratch. Alright. So at this point we're going to go ahead and click on Stage, and then click on Backdrops. We can actually have the program change the background however we see fit. Now, our default backdrop is just going to be this plain white, you know, whatever, screen. If we click on it, by default we'll have all these different options to paint on it, to draw on it. But if we click on, if we go to the bottom left, underneath New Backdrop, we have a couple options here. The first one is Choose Backdrop from Library. Now the online version of Scratch has all sorts of different options, far more than does the Pi version. I'm just going to click one for now. I'm going to click on Chalkboard just because I want to, if it ever wants to load. So once you click on that, or double click on it rather, it'll add a new backdrop, and it's taking its sweet time. so that we can actually, write some code saying, hey, change this backdrop when we do something. If we wanted to subtly change a backdrop, we can right-click it and duplicate it. And let's say flag. Whatever, close enough. We can actually write a piece of code in just a second, which I will show you, that will make the backdrop change ever so slightly from here to here, for example. Anyways, I digress, sorry. Cool stuff there. Now let's see. Sorry, again, these two different lessons are slightly different, but I like this one better because it's a better presentation, I think. So I'm just trying to figure out where I'd like for us to be now. Yeah, I already told you about that. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's go ahead and write ourselves a program to switch backgrounds here. We're going to want to have our stage selected. So when I say stage selected, I mean I want you to click on stage and then click on scripts. When we're writing code, it's very important that we write our code in the correct script area. We don't want to have, our ping pong paddle going crazy like a ping pong ball would. Alright. So make sure stage is selected, and then we're going to go to scripts. What we're going to do next is click on events and click and drag when the green flag is clicked. Let's then scroll over to looks. And let's move switch backdrop to underneath when the flag is clicked. Thanks, Devin. Take care. I hope you had a good night. So what I've got here, as soon as I click on this this flag, my cat is doing the same thing it was doing before, which is just bouncing back and forth. And the white screen that I previously had has now changed into this nice chalkboard saying yay. Alright. Now similarly, we can add an extra event to this code. And I made it say, when space is pressed, go to the next backdrop. I'm pressing my space bar right now. Pretty simple, but handy stuff to have, just for frame of reference. Now let's go click on our sprite now. And we're going to make it so we can actually control it. Alright. So what we're going to want to do is take out all this move 10 steps and if on edge bounce for now. And we're going to go back into the motion tab. Wait, not the motion tab yet, sorry. Let's go to the Control tab. And click and drag the if blank, then blank statement into our forever loop. What we're going to try to do is to make it so if we click on the right or left arrow, our sprite will go right or left. And to do that, we will go into the Sensing tab. The Sensing tab requires that you have, I guess usually you would have an if statement when you're using the Sensing tab. But in this case, what I'm looking for you to do is click and drag key space pressed. Oh, does it not work on this one? There we go. And I want you to drag it into the little hexagon after the word if. We're going to change the space to our right arrow. What do we want to have happen when the right arrow is pressed? How is our character going to move? Or how do we want our character to move, rather? Yes, to the right. I know that sounds silly, but you actually have to tell it that's what you want. So you want it to move to the right. So motion sounds like a good tab for that. Let's have ourselves move 10 steps if the right arrow is pressed. So I have my character moving the wrong way right now. So that would be an issue, wouldn't it? It's going to have it move this way for now. There, now we can run it. So now my character will move right forever, which is not necessarily a good thing, especially since we don't have a left option. So take an educated guess. How would we make it do the same thing but to the left? That's sort of a stupid question because it's literally the same code, but -10. Now I guess technically here, if we were going to move to the left, we would want to change our cat's costume, I guess, so that it would turn left. We can actually change our costume by going into the Looks tab. I guess it wouldn't be costume change, would it? That's something that I was having a brain fart with earlier. But anyways, we could change our change the costume to duplicate how it would behave, but flip it backwards so that when it goes left, we can make it go left. So let's see. So cool stuff here. Nothing too complicated, probably nothing that you hadn't already seen if you'd used Scratch before. So, I'm not really going to talk much, well, I guess I should talk about new sprites. But, we're actually going to start building our Pong game for now. So if you've done classes with us before, this is probably kind of familiar. But, actually no, before I do the Pong game, I should probably do a poll. How am I going pacing-wise today? I know that some people have used Scratch, some haven't. Shut up. Get out of here. So this is probably really boring to some of you. Maybe too fast, maybe too slow. Let's just see how y'all feel about it. Looking for one more folk to vote before I close her on up. Alright, well, close enough. 67% works out well. It looks like we're mostly good, so I'll continue on how I'm going on now. Alright. We're going to start making our Pong game now. So if you want to save what you've gotten so far, you can go ahead and click Save Now. Otherwise, I want you to go to File and then New. So y'all are familiar with Pong, right? Sort of like a 2D tennis game. Depending on which version you're playing, it might be one player, it might be two player. Everyone knows what Pong is though, right? Alright. I mean, I really hope you do. It's, it's like the classic of classic games. It's up there with, Pac-Man and Mario and stuff like that. Anyways, so at the very, very basic level here, we're going to need a ball. We're going to need to have a Pong ball. Surprise, surprise, right? So to do that, we're going to want to take away our cat, because we don't want our cat to be our Pong ball. Unless you do, which is kind of sadistic. But what we're going to do, we're going to right-click on our cat, and then click on Delete. Now you'll notice, right above where I just deleted in the Sprites menu, there's an option for New Sprite. Oh, what happened there? I'm sorry. I don't know why it paused for me. That was weird. Didn't mean to do that. Anyways, what I did is I clicked on the cat, I right-clicked it, and then hit delete. And we're going to, next to new sprite, click on the first option, choose sprite from library. And we want to find something that looks sort of like a ball, something that would make sense for a Pong game. In my last class I used an apple, but I want to use something more fun this time around. Which is not this. Let's do... I don't even see a melon. I'm going to do Earth, and double click on that. So it would be good to note right now that once you have something in your stage area, to the right of the About option, there's a whole bunch of different other options. Duplicate, delete, grow. How do you delete the original sprite? Good question. What you do is you would right-click it and then go to delete. Anyways, at this top screen, there's options to grow and to shrink. If you click on it, and then you click on your sprite that you want to resize, it will let you grow or shrink it. I think the ball's kind of big, so I wanted to make it smaller. So let's see where we are. Talked about making it bigger, smaller. You can duplicate it if you want, but we're not going to need to duplicate it for now. Alright. What I want to first make is for the ball to just bounce up and down forever. What would my first step be to make my ball bounce up and down forever? Any ideas of how I would code that? There's one thing I would need to start it. I'm going to slowly meander over to it. I'm going to slowly move my mouse. We want to initiate the code somehow. Now, it depends on how you want to do it. I probably would prefer using the green flag being clicked to initiate our code to run, okay? Now, another thing I mentioned is we want it to go on forever. Conveniently, this nice forever is available to us. Hooray! Now, if you all remember what I mentioned for like a split second earlier, by default, our ball is going to go in the positive x direction. So if y'all are familiar with Cartesian coordinates, which you should be after code combat, the x direction is going to be facing towards the right. So our ball's going to want to go towards the right. In the motion tab, there is something very handy to make it so our ball does not go right. You can make our ball start going in a different direction. We can use the point in direction, which is by default 90, which is positive x, I think. I'm going to double check that. Yeah. Positive x. Where was I going with that? Anyways, we can make it so our first direction is facing up or down. And so I'm going to have it facing down first. Now I'm going to do something wrong here intentionally. I'm going to put this point in direction 180 and then the move 10 steps within the forever loop. Can anyone tell me why this would work poorly? And if you can't, go ahead and try it to see why this will not work. Why would we not want to keep this point in direction inside this forever loop? Let's take a look. Let's go ahead and initiate the code for it to run. Well, that's weird. It did the same thing as the move 10 steps did. It just stops at the bottom. When we use this point in direction piece of code here, it's going to reset whatever direction your ball's going in and make it go down. So what's happening is it starts going down and it keeps moving down for 10 steps until it goes to the top of this loop again and starts going down again. So that doesn't make any sense. That's just weird. Let's retry this. This time by putting the point in direction outside of this forever loop. We would need an extra piece of code though to make it. Actually, hang on, let me double check my notes here. Yeah, there we go. We'll need an extra piece of code to make it so it's not doing the exact same thing. So let me show you. It's doing the exact same thing now. And that's where our old friend, if on edge bounce, comes in. So what you'll have here is a very, very boring Pong game. It's so boring it doesn't even do anything except go up and down. There's all sorts of different things that we're going to need to add to make this Pong game viable. I know, right? Isn't this so much fun? Woo! We're going to need to add 2 more sprites. One of which is the paddle, but we're actually going to create a sprite that will be for our dead zone. So I'm going to stop running my code real quick. When I say the dead zone, I mean that this sprite will be an indicator of, hey, if the ball touches this, you lose. So that dead zone is going to be placed underneath the paddle. So let's go ahead and make a couple of sprites. We're going to make them by hand this time, just for funsies. So next to new sprite, we're going to paint a new sprite. And we just want to make a rectangle. You can do this by, putting a bunch of lines or just freehanding it. I'm just going to do it via the rectangle. Oops, hang on one second. Did that wrong. I'm just going to do it via the rectangle tool. I made sure to fill it in. In there. Easy enough. It's going to be our paddle. Now, it might be nice for us to resize our paddle to make it smaller, since that is an enormous paddle, and it wouldn't be much of a challenge at all. I'm making mine blue. You can do whatever you want for yours. But I would recommend naming each sprite that you make something that indicates what the sprite is for. So if you make your sprite, you'll want to click on the eye in the upper right corner of the sprite menu and name it something that you'll remember. Paddle. Perfect. That's our paddle. Yay. Self-explanatory. I love it. Now we're going to do the same thing for our dead zone. We're going to paint a new sprite. Rename it something convenient. I'm going to name it Death is Here because it's funny. And it's being funky. I don't know how to get this. Let's see if I can show it real quick. Nope. Now, how do I get this back up? There we go. No. And now I will have 3 different sprites, 2 of which do nothing right now. And by nothing I mean we have script. When we select the earth, we have our script to jump up or bounce up and down, but nothing saying what happens when our sprites collide. Alright? So we want it so that when the ball hits our paddle, it bounces off of it. We want it so that when our ball hits the dead zone, we die or the game stops. And we want it, the ball to, or not the ball, we want the paddle to move left and right. Okay? But that's something that I've already taught you how to do, how to move your paddle left and right. Does anybody remember what we did last time? What we did earlier today to make this paddle move left and right? And that's the answer, so I don't want to show you. How would we make it so that the paddle responds to our keyboard input? Any idea? We would need to select our paddle, select our starting event, being when the flag is clicked, make a forever loop, and then 2 if statements. Now these if statements will depend on a keyboard input that we choose. So just like before, if key space pressed, which we'll need to change to the right arrow, and then key space pressed to the left arrow. From here we can do exactly what we did before. Where we move it 10 steps or negative 10 steps, depending on if it's left or right. I think that's it. Yeah. So let's see what happens when I run it. We've got a paddle going, but we don't have any collision detection going, which we absolutely need to have our paddle, be a paddle and not just a rectangle going left and right on the screen. So that said, we are getting very close to the end of class today. Was there any questions on what we've done so far today in Scratch? While if you have a question, go ahead and type it in. While you're doing that, just a reminder, try to find something that you can use as a monitor for our Raspberry Pi for next week. Please try and do that. I don't want folks being confused. If you have to go, you are more than welcome to go. Thank you for coming out tonight. Take care, Noah. You still don't have a Raspberry Pi? Have you talked to Mr. D about that? If you don't, actually let me write this down and let me email him like right now. And I will get him to okay, I can't remember how to spell your name, sorry. Alright, so I'm going to email him about mailing you a Raspberry Pi so that you can... Yeah, sorry, I didn't see it. I'm going to email him as soon as class is over. I'm going to